Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Thursday, May the 22nd. I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast that gives you everything you need for the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes.
And we start with an important goodbye today.
That's right. It's farewell to the Chagos Islands. We didn't know you well. Now, we never will. Keir Starmer will attend a virtual farewell in the next few hours, hoping that's the last time he ever hears those two words.
For sure. And here are another two Keir Starmer never wants to hear again: winter and fuel. What a mess. This is the nearest I've seen the government come to a panic on one of its own key measures, Sam. And I think it's indicative of a really destabilising row at the very heart of the government on how to save money and the consequences.
I mean, what a day yesterday. Keir Starmer executed a speculative potential U-turn on some of the cuts to the winter fuel allowance that were announced just last year. And in doing so, he's given permission for everyone to beat up on the biggest early decision that his government and his Chancellor made. But, and I think you can guess this from the way I've been framing it, he has done so without having a plan of what to do next. Literally, he's turned up and he has no plan. What is going on?
Oh my goodness, you're grumpy this morning. Cheer up, Sam, because next week is parliamentary recess and you get to lie in for a whole week unless something goes really crazy in the political parish, which apparently can happen these days.
I think, do you know what? I kind of think I am quite grumpy about the whole winter fuel stuff. And for this very particular reason, I'm grumpy on behalf of the media. Look, straight after the local elections, the Tuesday after the bank holiday and the weekend where everyone digested the results, The Guardian, the brilliant Pippa Crerar, reported that Number 10 were looking at the winter fuel U-turn. And Number 10 told us and everyone else that it wasn't true. Proactively, firmly, emphatically, that it wasn't true. And of course it was. And it was because the Prime Minister confirmed that it was yesterday. And I don't know, Anne, you and I have been around a bit, but I just don't think that's on. I just don't think that's on at all. It's a downgrade moment for government communications. I trust them less because I don't think you should deny things that were absolutely evidently true at the time. They've been caught out. It's a bit of a moment. And I think they actually need to pay the price for not telling us the truth.
Okay, it's a fair point on the comms there, and we'll do more in substance on that winter fuel reverse in a moment, and particularly the role that Gordon Brown is playing. He's here to help, or not. But also a sentencing review today, which is going to land very heavily around the government and perhaps another target for its opponents. And what we're seeing, Sam, is a series of monumental changes to the criminal justice system about to be introduced with the help of a former Tory. David Gauke's independent sentencing review lands, and it seeks to end the prison capacity crisis by calling for shorter custodial sentences, potentially even for some rapists and killers. And yes, we did know that, but the detail really does tell us that it is quite a risk as well as an opportunity for Keir Starmer and for the government.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that in a second, but let's major on winter fuel to start with, because it was a bit of a surprise what Keir Starmer did in Prime Minister's question. What on earth do you think Keir Starmer was trying to achieve yesterday, Anne? Let me just go through some of the background, and then I want to get your take on it. In one of her first acts as Chancellor in July last year, Rachel Reeves stripped a £300 winter fuel allowance from 10 million pensioners. And she said that the savings that generated, which is in the order of 1.5 billion, which is not a lot of money, when it comes to overall government spend of over £1 trillion, she said that sum, which had massive political significance, was absolutely vital as a signal to the markets that this government was fiscally responsible, that it understood the need to balance the books, and that it would play fast and loose with the public finances. And in just under a year, that one decision has been cited by many, many MPs that I've been talking to as the biggest reason for the local elections disaster, which Labour had less than a month ago. And as a result, at the first whiff of grape shot, they have U-turned. But they've only they've only announced that they're going to U-turn. They haven't actually said what they're going to do. I've got the Times next to me. I'm one of the very few people in this country that still gets a physical newspaper delivered through the door every morning. And the headline on the Times is "Pensioners to wait year after winter fuel U-turn." Because what Keir Starmer said yesterday is that there will be an announcement at the next fiscal event, which is probably the budget in the autumn, because Rachel Reeves says there's only going to be one fiscal event a year. And that means it's probably at that point, probably not definitely, but probably too late to sort it out for the payment in 2025, which it gets doled out between October and December. And so we're talking about changes for 2026, as far as we're aware, but government weren't able to answer any questions at all on the substance of this yesterday, making them look like they were having a facepalm moment, which is what it feels like.
A facepalm moment. Oh, get you. You're so millennial. Gordon Brown roaring out of retirement to give advice to Rachel Reeves. She now has effectively two shadow chancellors, I think, Sam. Angela Rayner proposing an alternative squeeze on the rich proposals, going down, I'm sure, not very well with Rachel Reeves, and the former Chancellor, indeed former Prime Minister Gordon Brown as well. He's saying the government needs to be fair to pensioners. There's a case for people on the top rate of income tax to be excluded from winter fuel payments. And this is just very, very awkward, isn't it, when you have someone who has a great standing in the Labour Party coming out and issuing direct challenges. And to your point about when any prospective change might come in, it does appear, and certain things that Gordon Brown has said in a number of comments, including to your colleague Sophie Ridge at Sky News, is that things have to move fast in order for pensioners to be able to feel any change in any benefit sooner. So it really does sound like not only is he challenging the substance, but he's challenging the timing of Rachel Reeves's focus, as you mentioned, on having only one key fiscal event a year and putting everything into that. So talk about backseat driving. I mean, he's actually trying to change the gears as well as the destination.
Can I just pause on what Gordon Brown was actually proposing? Gordon Brown was saying that everyone but people who are in the top bracket of income tax as pensioners should receive the winter fuel payment, right? Now, remember, Rachel Reeves took the winter fuel payment away from 10 million pensioners, right? Now, under Gordon Brown's proposal, the number of pensioners paying income tax at the higher and additional rate is just 1 million. In other words, he would restore the winter fuel payment to all but 1 million pensioners. In other words, that is de facto basically a complete reversal of the policy that Rachel Reeves did. So yes, there are a tiny number of taxpayers who wouldn't get it, and it would rely on the pensioner receiving a really chunky income. But basically, he's saying put this policy in the bin in any kind of substantive terms. And I do wonder whether that's where they're going to end up, because the political hit that they've taken from this is massive. And so clearly, given the huge amount of pain they are inflicting on themselves by sort of half announcing a U-turn without having any of the details, looking like a complete mess, inviting us to do months of speculation until a fiscal event at some point in the future where they're going to announce what maybe might happen. I mean, in the end, I can see somebody in government just going, make this pain stop, and doing quite a costly measure. But, Gordon Brown's proposal is basically putting almost all of Rachel Reeves' signature first decision in the bin.
Interesting on so many counts and risky on so many counts. When you talk about somebody making that decision, I think that somebody's going to have to be Keir Starmer, isn't it? And that brings us to the heart of the relationship between Starmer and Reeves, who said many times on this podcast that whoever else was cut loose, wherever there was scoldings handed out internally, it was always the intention of the Starmer Reeves project to be joined at the hip. But if this goes as badly as it seems to be at the moment, I think you make a really good point that I hadn't quite taken on board when I was looking through the Gordon Brown comments. At some point, you either make a proper reversal or you will end up with the worst of all possible worlds, where your authority is kind of leaking on it, but you haven't made changes that the public will notice. And I think that will be the conversation being conducted. I imagine it in quite a mood around the Treasury number 10 and number 11 this morning.
The only person happy this morning is Bob the cat, which you might be able to hear purring. One other important but niche insidery point, Anne, which is there's been a complete clear out of the economic and growth team in number 10 in recent weeks, right? And I bumped into an MP yesterday who said, who is doing economics in number 10? Rav Atwell, who did the manifesto for Labour and was sort of like the economic guru. He's an ex-Treasury official. He was quite young. He's off. The person in charge of growth, he went. And this guy was going, but who is replacing them? Like, who do you think will get it? And nobody has any idea. Nobody is steering the ship in a grown-up way when it comes to economics in number 10. Yet they've done this big decision, this big, messy half decision. And that's an issue. I just want to make another point. In the briefing after Keir Starmer made this partial half announcement yesterday, people were asked, well, how can you do that? You said you had to cut winter fuel payments because of the markets last year. Yeah, and the officials said, well, look, the economy is in a better place. And there is a little bit of better economic news around at the moment. And if that economic news gets a bit worse again, I suspect they're still going to have to do the U-turn. But I think that what Keir Starmer is doing sends a really, really difficult and damaging signal, which at some point in the future may be hurled against him and Rachel Reeves. What effectively Keir Starmer's government is announcing to the markets this week is we are going to back down. In the face of political pressure, we are going to back down. And if there are cuts that we said were important in order to provide fiscal stability, actually, sometimes politics matters more. Now, just right now, this week, this month, that doesn't feel like that's particularly a problem. But if Donald Trump does something that provokes more of a downturn in the world economy, if there's some exogenous shock, then the markets will look at Britain and go, well, you've got a chance, you just can't hold the line because a bunch of whinging Labour MPs can upend fiscal policy. That's a problem. And that's why I think this is so potentially problematic. And the way it's being done is so mind-blowingly stupid.
Gosh, you're on hot form this morning. Sam goes to a lot of trendy indie concerts, and I like to think the last one he went to see was called Exogenous Shock. He sounds absolutely outraged this morning. And it's not like there is only that going on, right, Sam? Because there is now another big front is about to be opened up in politics. If the opposition is looking for targets, it's not going to be short of them, because today the government will announce a series of monumental changes to the criminal justice system. And there's other Gauke reforms, the ex-Tory Justice Secretary saying Britain is projected to have another 9,800 prisoners by early 2028. That would lead to chaos. The prisons are already at bursting point. Another round of convicts granted early release last week to free up space. So they're laying out clearly that something needs to be done, and it needs to be very radical. We've been prepped for that. And the Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood will deliver a common statement this afternoon where she will accept the vast majority of the Gauke recommendations, which we'll run through in just a minute. But the biggest pillar will be slashing custodial sentences for thousands of prisoners, including some who are in jail for sexual and very violent offences. And some absolutely riveting detail in here got by the Sun. Chemical castration proposed for a group of sex offenders, which Mahmood is looking at making mandatory. Not surprisingly, the paper went to town on that in the Sun, pedos to be castrated fashion. We should say chemical castration, just so that people don't get the wrong impression. But it really does mean that you've now got criminal justice and those big dividing lines about what to do about that and the risks of early releases and how to handle that in order to solve the prison crisis coming on top of what you have just described there with the economic and fiscal chaos and the danger of those exogenous shocks.
I am absolutely fascinated by the idea that Shabana Mahmood is proposing mandatory chemical castration. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I know how the politics of that is going to play out. I think it's interesting, but I'm going to put my hands up. I'm just going to watch this one with fascination. I can see there being an incredibly intense moral argument around that. And actually, I think that Shabana Mahmood is one of the most interesting thinkers around the cabinet table. She's actually carried herself, with more authority and dignity in a really, really tough situation than frankly a lot of her colleagues. And so she doesn't do things by accident. I can see there being a moral argument. I can see there being a backlash in the Labour Party. I can see. I would love to know. I don't know yet the polling around this. My gut is that it may actually end up being quite popular amongst members of the public, but in the same way that the death penalty is, and we reject, Westminster rejects arguments around the death penalty, despite the public popularity of it almost entirely. Just popularity on its own doesn't necessarily mean that there is a good case for doing something. That's always been the view of Westminster ever since we abolished the death penalty in the 60s. So I'm going to watch whether or not this one plays out. A little bit of me thinks that it won't happen, and that it's just a very, very good talking point, and then will be quietly dropped, because it provides that kind of radio phone-in dimension to today's announcement, to mask the bigger, more complicated politics. But I really, really don't know.
But I think the government wants the radio phone-in vibe around this, because that's the way you're going to be able to sell a policy that has a lot of risks to it, doesn't it? And I mean, we had an aide telling Politico playbook this morning the scale of the challenges we face in the prison sector and criminal justice means we have to tackle even these longer sentences with some force. Now, you can also see the risks if and when anyone released who's been a serious offender, then does so again in a particularly heinous way, Sam. So you do need to have something, I think, very muscular to set against the risk narrative. Of course, the Conservatives, as in not David Gauke, who is now effectively working alongside Labour. But oh my goodness, I mean, the opposition now, if they really can't score on this, then what can they score on? We have the Chief Inspector of Probation, Martin Jones, saying that this is a catastrophic risk unless the entire probation system is overhauled, by which he means given more cash, and cash, for reasons we've just discussed in another context, it is very thin on the ground. So yes, I think Shabana Mahmood, who is an impressive performer, she's got a good relationship with David Gauke. They've obviously gone at this prospective reform together. But like all of these things, is once bits of it start to come through and have the unintended consequences, I think there is a really very big risk of something going wrong here. At the same time, there is a prisons crisis, and the government did say in opposition that it was going to front it up, so it is doing so.
The prisons crisis is one of those which genuinely, I think, a lot of people accept was part of the inheritance that Labour got, the bad bit of the inheritance that Labour got from the Conservatives. There was no plan from the Tories about how to deal with that. And certainly from everything I saw of the politics of last year, if you remember, Alex Chalk, the Tory Justice Secretary, wanted to deal with the prisons crisis. Rishi Sunak wouldn't let him. Some people think that one of the contributory factors to the early election that Rishi Sunak calls was a desire amongst Conservatives not to have to confront head on some of the questions that the government is confronting today. Whether or not that makes any difference to public opinion, in the end, when they see the measures that are being produced, I don't know. But while some bits of the inheritance and the sort of and the black holes and the rest of it feel a little bit confected, I think the prisons crisis is genuinely something that Labour was just lumped with and has had to deal with. But that doesn't mean that the public are going to love the solutions or like them or indeed tolerate them at all. That was the alarm. That's it. Possibly.
Can I squeeze a little scooplet in though, Sam, just before we go? Because I thought it's partly for your amusement, also partly because it's true. Really nice line here in our playbook this morning. Look at this context that we're talking about. Everything going off in all directions for the government. So you'd imagine they might like a bit of comfort and some advice from someone who had a very wobbly first term and came back to win big. Guess who it is?
Go on.
Radio silence. No, it's Anthony Albanese in Australia. Some of his key Labour with an OR strategists are in London this week for top-level meetings. The Australian team meeting Labour officials here. Morgan McSweeney and his lieutenants want to learn how Albanese won big after a lot of wobbles in his first term. Does that sound familiar?
It does, and we've always got to allow our political friends hope, haven't we, Anne? Well, thank you very much indeed for that, and for everything. It's parliamentary recess after today, which means that we go off to our respective very nice holiday homes / tents in the middle of the countryside, and we'll be back if something really big happens, but in absence of that, I am probably not going to wake up and stare at Anne for quite a few days, and we'll be back a week on Monday to set you up for the week ahead in British politics then.
I'm going off to the opera as my first night off, and Sam's going to a tent, and that's just the people we are.
See you then.
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Malika Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.